Hey folks, John Boehm here. Let's Talk Beef podcast. Still in Minnesota, probably will be for a while here. But we're just trying to fight through this weather. Had some snow last week, and we had cold weather here the last few days. So hopefully we're seeing the trend upward here, and the temperatures coming. And guys are starting to get out in the fields. But saw some guys planting corn yesterday. So spring is hopefully here to stay for a little while and move forward. And cows are calving. Getting crazy with that, and just been hanging out on the farm and doing things around there. But anyways, this week's podcast, I talk with Dr. Bob Sager of the White Sulpher Springs, Montana area. Bob is a veterinarian, been a veterinarian for a very long time, grew up on a ranch in Manhattan, Montana. Has always been drawn to beef cattle, and got his vet degree and has been traveling the world doing all sorts of things with beef cattle nutrition mainly. Spent 3 years in Russia, working with the Russian government on their beef herd over there. He's a dedicated man to the beef industry and beef cattle health and nutrition and stuff like that. So a very good talk with Bob. Had a great time talking with him. Interesting guy. I wish I could spend more time with him. I only got to spend about a little over an hour with him. We were supposed to meet with him the next morning, but that was the first time our bus ever broke down. So just things didn't come together the next morning to get together with him for a few hours. But that's the way it goes. But had a really good conversation with Bob that evening in his, I think it was the City Hall building or Town Hall in White Sulpher Springs there, where Bob does some work there too. So there's a little kind of buzzing, humming sound in the background. There was not much I could do about that. It was just where Bob wanted to record, so I just had to deal with it and work through it. But the audio is pretty good overall. I think it's not too bad. So hope you guys enjoyed the podcast, and we'll talk to you soon. So thanks for listening, guys. See ya. Where did you grow up, and how did you grow up on a ranch and all that? And so where was that at?
Manhattan, Montana.
Manhattan, Montana. Where's that? I don't even.
Just west of Bozeman, about 20 miles.
Okay.
The airport is at Belgrade, which is halfway between Bozeman and Manhattan.
Okay. I won't be far from there on Friday morning.
Yeah.
When I fly out. So.
Grew up on a small beef cattle ranch. I was the sixth generation that owned and raised beef cattle.
Okay.
And my desire was to ranch, but we had a small place similar to you, and we leased ground and worked hard to get that to work. And I could see in high school it wasn't going to support two families.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a good student, but I was an underachiever.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately, I took pre-med classes along with my animal science in college and had a degree in chemistry, so I had a real heavy academic load.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I didn't have the top GPA, and in those days it was a 1 in 10 chance of getting in. I beat the odds and got accepted my first year and went to Colorado State, which was at that time probably the best opportunity I could for cattle.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a summer internship with them, and I rode pens at Three Rivers feedlot when it was brand new.
Oh, yeah?
At Gilcrest. So I had an opportunity to see the industry side of beef cattle.
Yep.
And then I was a witchy student, so I was given my out-of-state tuition by the state of Montana. Did not have to have the obligation of coming back to the state, but I had a desire to come back to the state to be close to my family, and then I thought it was good for me to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Offered jobs in South Dakota and Nebraska and stuff for twice the salary, but I came back
Mm-hmm.
to Montana, and I never regretted it.
Yep.
Worked 2 really great jobs for about 4.5 years before I went back home, and I bought the clinic that I grew up in.
Okay.
And during the 20 years I was there, I saw a huge growth. We went from 1 to 3 veterinarians and 9 employees, but the town grew and surrounded me, and so that changed my practice quite a bit. And then After about 20 years, I was doing more and more work this direction, 180 trips a year. And so I did a market survey with a fictitious marketing firm and everything, and I found out that there was a great demand. So I built a practice at Wilsall, which is an hour south here.
Okay.
And saw that grow tremendously until I had 3 veterinarians and had almost 300 ranch accounts, which was great for a single practitioner. Raised 7 children, bought a small ranch on $8 rabies shots and $30 cat space, so that took a hell of a lot of those. A hell of a lot of those. And then the property at Belgrade, the town surrounded me, and one guy walked in one day and said, "I'll give you so much a square foot," and I could figure out in my head that was worth probably more than I could ever get out of it.
Yeah.
So I sold the property for commercial value and used that to buy the ranch and build a new facility from scratch. And then I operated about a 60-mile radius, and I did that for about 17 years. But the desire to fully understand the relationship with nutrition and health always haunted me through my practice career. And I was fortunate enough to be associated with the right kind of people. And when I had situations such as vaccine failures that related to micromineral antagonism, as microminerals are critical for immune function, I had an opportunity to do a field investigation with Pfizer, that now is Zoetis, and that jump-started my thirst for knowledge to understand the complex interaction better. So I hired 2 associates in 2009, and I started my graduate studies in 2010. Got my master's while I was still working. I was still doing cabin calls at night and all that emergency duty. And that was trying because it was an hour and 10-minute drive to campus one way. But I balanced that.
To Montana State?
Yes, sir. Balanced that. And then at the end of my master's career, I was offered a job at the University of Missouri, where I wanted to go to study nutrition under Monty Curley, who was pretty well known, Dr. Curley. And then I got a job as a ambulatory clinician with the veterinary school there. So I took 4th-year students out on farm calls, primarily food animal calls, but heavy emphasis of beef cattle. Started my doctorate there, and then there was a kind of a fight between the vet school and the animal science department, like there is a lot of places. Funding got slashed, so I came back home because I was offered a part-time assistant professorship, and all I had to do was to finish my research studies. I had enough credits built up that exceeded the requirements for a master's degree by almost 2-fold. So I did very little academic work for 2 years and did mostly research, so I got done a year early. And my research was on microminerals affecting the immune system of beef cattle. Primarily my research trials were on the element cobalt, which is very highly correlated with copper. That's the most critical element in immune function. So I did 3 trials that were successful, and as a result of that work and some work that was completed in Germany, NRC increased the requirements of cobalt in beef cattle right after that. So I had a good feeling of that. I wrote a handbook for beef cattle in the process that I got published a year ago, and I'm selling those for beer money now. I've sold enough. I paid for my editing and printing costs, so now I got a little bit of beer money. I could offer you beer.
There you go.
But that's been enjoyable.
Yeah.
And then right at the time I finished my doctorate at Montana State in 2014, I was teaching 3 classes and getting about a third of an assistant professor salary. The cell phone rang one day, and it was a recruiting firm from Moscow, not Moscow, Idaho, Moscow, Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And my first comment was, no, I'm not interested in going to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And they just kept talking and talking, and pretty soon after 3 Skype interviews at 1 in the morning and a trip offered to me to interview on a 5-day trip to Southwest Russia, they offered me a position as being a senior veterinarian. And at that time they had 30 ranches with about 100,000 head of beef cows.
Yeah.
And then they were building a brand new feedlot and in the process of finishing a $2 billion packing plant. So I arrived on the scene during the first calving, and I was responsible for about 50 veterinarians and overall biosecurity and health programs.
Mm-hmm.
And during the 2 years I was there, I saw them become certified Angus beef, and then I saw the production double to where they had 57 farms, and when I left they were building 21 more.
Wow.
They had finished the second feedlot, so they had a capacity of over 100,000 head a year, with a possibility of going up to 125,000. They had got the certified Angus beef certification, so they were supplying a lot of the steaks and high-end cuts to the big hotel chains in Europe, Sheraton and Hilton and all that, and some steak houses. And they started this program in 2009 because President Putin had said that he didn't want to spend $3 billion a year on frozen beef from Brazil that was less than kuzino, which is tasty. Russian word for kuzino. So they started this program, and in the process they bought 100,000 head of heifer calves from America and Australia. A lot of the cattle originated from Montana, in the Lewistown area, and some of the clients I had when I was in practice.
Okay.
And so they started the 100,000 head of heifer calves, and when I left, they had 255,000 mother cows. We put 39,000 cedars in that summer before I left. Before I left, we weaned 210,000 head of calves over a 3-week period.
Jeepers.
And during the time that I was there, we imported 75,000 head of yearlings that were drought-stricken from Western Australia that came on boats up through the Suez Canal and arrived in the Black Sea ports, and then were trucked on 700 and some semis to Southwest Russia that came into feedlots. So I was in charge of that process, which was a great learning experience for me.
Yeah.
And I got to see both good and bad. And I saw things that were man-made or man-caused that I'd never seen in my life. Simple things like not mixing urea in a roto-mix truck and dumping it in a feed bunk and 20-some head tip over. To urea toxicity, I saw things like that I never saw in my life. And yet I saw some great improvement in the 2 years I was there because they had no infrastructure. Everything was brand new, and they had no generation that had any knowledge of beef cattle at all.
Really?
So during the time I was there, they had 17 American cowboys that came and basically worked with the ranch managers to teach basics of handling cattle, and we started a humane euthanasia program on animals that needed to be put down that was not in place when I arrived, and we had to do that to meet the standards for the certified beef program.
Yep.
And to see 75,000 head of yearlings come, on a 32-day journey through the Suez Canal and then arrive in southwest Russia in the wintertime is quite an experience when they didn't have any hair. So we went through a lot of straw, bedding them down, and I got to see a lot of man-made caused problems, and it made me appreciate the resiliency of beef cattle as a whole, and how they can tolerate a lot of stresses. I got to see 2 tick seasons there in Russia versus 1 season here. Got to see the typical anaplasm and the bovine respiratory diseases that we have here in the United States, but then I got to be involved in endemic rabies, where we had 27,000 head quarantined because of rabies. I got to see anthrax because it's endemic for anthrax, and I got to see things that I did not get to see here. So I was very fortunate and blessed that as an older veterinarian, I was introduced to a broad spectrum of veterinary medicine in beef cattle that I had never experienced before.
Yeah.
I worked weekly with nutritionists because my degree was in nutrition, and I got a doctorate in animal science with emphasis rumen nutrition. And they had a consulting veterinarian out of Canada, and I worked with him real close, so I developed some stronger interest in that. So I came back and used some of that knowledge and started a consulting firm in 2016 when I came back to work with ranchers that were interested in doing winter cake programs and supplementing with straw to reduce feed costs, and people interested in nutrition to increase first service conception heifers. I did work with water quality, the importance of good quality water in relation to animal health.
Yep.
I've been formulating custom mineral programs for 30-some years. I did that in my practice just as a sideline, but then since I've come back, I've got into that full time. So I have clients in Montana and Idaho and Wyoming and stuff. And that has been a great learning experience because I've worked with some very high-end producers that utilize mob grazing and have unique situations that I've never seen before. And then we do forage and water analysis for particular ranch units to try to see where antagonistic minerals are that would tie up some of the minerals particularly sensitive to immune function. So that's been real rewarding, and in the process I've learned, but I've used the learning experience to fine-tune or get better in my work. Got involved with a ranch in Idaho this summer that brings in 2,700 head of yearlings from Nevada and California, and we've had wonderful results with health, almost no foot rot, almost no eye problems with a custom mineral, and in turn we've saved them $200 a ton on 26 tons used a year, so that's a good economical advantage. I work with some high-end people. I work with some seed stock producers here in Montana that have average yearling bull sales or 2-year bull sales that average close to $10,000 a head, and those are great experiences to be challenged with those type of things. We've had hoof issues that we've addressed by not feeding feed-grade antibiotics, but by tuning the microminerals and using things like biotin and chelate zinc to increase hoof health and things like that. That's been improved in those units that had problems before. And I look forward, even as an old fart, I look forward to continuing with that type of work.
Mm-hmm.
To work with the ranchers in this area is a great feeling, and it's a feeling of being blessed because they're the best people in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm still a student. I still look at myself as I'm still in the beginning stages of learning all this. The complexity of nutrition related to health and immune function and how it plays all together is very complex. There's some understood, a lot that has not been understood, and that each year we become a little bit more familiar, but to implement those new findings and techniques is sometimes challenging because of the economics, as you well know.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm doing now. I'm with the university for another year, I think, and then I'm going to go full-time in my consulting. I've worked hard all through my life, and I think it's time to, to back off just a little bit.
Yep.
With the two jobs, I probably average 90+ hours a week just doing things. I have hobbies that I put it back on the burner, that I haven't done for a couple of years since I returned from Russia that I'd like to do.
Yeah.
I have 10 grandchildren, raised seven children during my practice career, and I just don't see them. I'm stuck up here. The university selected this spot, which was more centrally located, and so I would like to get to an area where I can be Grandpa or Bob again.
Yeah.
I probably took a lot of time in sharing the story, and I apologize on that, but
No, that's
I
good.
thought it was a good opportunity to. The interest on being a veterinarian started when I was age 11. Of course, being raised on a beef cattle ranch, and I was the only one of 6 kids that was interested in doing anything agriculture.
And you said it was a 6th generation?
I was a 6th generation.
So how did it go? Where did it start then?
Yeah, my ancestors came from southeast Germany.
Okay.
And migrated to the United States in 1790 to Philadelphia. And some of the generation that came in the early 1800s, a cow died when the ship caught a fire in the Baltimore Harbor. I do know that.
Wow.
And then they migrated eventually to Missouri, and then my great-grandfather came to Colorado and bought a registered Hereford cow that he put in an ox cart and traveled to Levita, Colorado, which is southern Colorado.
Okay.
And his son, my great-grandfather, was part of the board of directors of the original National Western Livestock Show back in the 1880s.
Really?
Family raised cattle in southeast Colorado. And then my dad thought there was too damn many Democrats and people in Colorado, and moved to Montana in the 30s.
Okay.
And was a cowboy on some big ranches in the 30s. And
Yep.
then got into livestock auctioneering. He was a nationally known purebred livestock auctioneer for 30-some years and taught auction school. And
Wow.
and he had a ranch on the side, and he reflected his passion of growing beef cattle and beef cattle husbandry to me. That's in my book that I wrote. I dedicated my book to him. So I was fortunate to see and share the passion that he had that was handed down by his father.
Yeah.
So I'm the 6th generation to own and operate cattle.
Okay.
Something that's unique with me, that's not always common with a lot of veterinarians, is I've raised cattle for 50-some years myself. I own cattle, so I get to see the pulse of the industry on a daily basis, the economics. I understand that a lot better, which gives me a better relationship with the producers and the clients that I have.
Yep.
If they ask me if a bull's worth fixing because of a penile problem, then I can share the economics and let him make a decision based on what he thinks is best for him. So that's been rewarding. I've mentored 340 some vet students during my career.
Wow.
We had a apartment complex built right into the clinic where we had 1 to 3. I've had the University of Minnesota students with me.
Oh, yeah.
I've hired 2 University of Minnesota graduates in my career out of the 22 veterinarians that I've hired. And I've gone to almost every vet school in the United States and several overseas. I've traveled to 5 continents in my career, which has given me a great opportunity to see beef cattle production in other areas than just Montana.
Yeah.
And certainly the opportunity to see things firsthand in Russia was an eye-opening experience.
You said 6 siblings? Where were you in line?
I was second to the youngest.
Second to the youngest.
Yeah, I have 3 brothers that are engineers,
Okay.
so I'm the only cowboy of the bunch. And,
Yep.
and sisters were basically school teachers. So yeah.
So were you always drawn to the cattle, or how did?
I was always drawn to cattle. My first word was bull.
There you go.
My nickname is Beef.
Yep.
I've had the nickname Beef since I was 7 years old, and I actually have it stamped into my leather belt. And most of the professors that still communicate with me call me Beef instead of Bob.
Yeah.
So I'm hooked into it many different ways.
In different ways.
Yeah.
So when did becoming a vet? When did that come into mind?
I was about 11 when I really developed a keen interest. We had a bull that got sick, and my dad allowed me to give the penicillin shot. And even though that bull died, it jump-started my interest. And then I didn't apply myself. I told you I was an underachiever all the way through school. I was always happy to work on the ranch and left homework until Sunday night, so it was always a slide job, but I always managed to get through. And then in my undergraduate college years, I was active in almost everything that came around, and I still worked some strong hours at the ranch. But I still was interested in agriculture, particularly animal science, and I was interested in the medicine, so that helped me achieve my goal of being a vet. It was hard to get accepted the years that I applied, as you probably heard. So I was very fortunate to having that opportunity now with the economics and expenses of education. I don't know if I would.
Yeah.
I can share something with you that is mind-boggling. My DVM cost me $10,000. And now it's $10,000 a semester or more, not counting living expenses.
Yeah.
And I have that shingle or that certificate on the wall. I worked at feedlots. I worked extra hours while I was in school. I lived in the back of garages. I lived in dumps, so to speak. Loaded all the clothes up and brought it home at the end of the semester so my mom could do the washing. We wore white shirts and ties in class all the time in the old days.
Oh, yeah.
Had to have military haircuts.
Yeah.
And then I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't have a fancy car. I just got by as economic as I could. But as a result, I came out of school not having any debt. So what I got going when I first started, I could apply toward owning my own practice, which was a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. Was there any ranching on your mom's side?
There was no ranching on my mom's side. There was farming on my mom's side.
Okay.
They were originally from eastern Missouri and migrated to Montana in the 20s, and they were mostly farmers. my dad was very involved with beef cattle all through his career, and we raised beef cattle all the time I was growing up until I was in vet school. And my dad was in his 70s and then sold the cow herd, and I had an opportunity to sell the ranch at that time.
Okay, I was going to ask, so is the ranch is no longer
in the Sager name,
yeah.
Except for my small little chunk of globe.
Yeah.
It's pretty unique. I have a ranch at the base of the Crazy Mountains. I'm probably the only guy that you ever will run into that had a mountain range named after you.
Yeah. So what did you guys raise when you were growing up?
We raised registered Herefords.
Herefords? Horned or polled?
Horned.
Horned.
And sold bulls privately the whole time I was growing up. And then my cow herd is basically black-white face baldies. And then I use a red Angus or a composite red bull for a three-way cross.
Okay.
So I have basically a terminal herd.
Yep.
Keep very few replacements.
Yep.
And I've slowly reduced the herd. When I went to Russia, sold the majority of them, and the neighbor leased my ranch, and still has the ranch leased to this day.
Yeah.
So that's the journey.
Yeah. So you have 7 kids?
I have 7 children.
So do you have a 7th and 8th generation ranchers in there, or?
No, I'm going to be the one that fouls things up.
You're going to be the last one?
No, I've got a son that's in medicine, and I've got daughters that have gone through college to become school teachers and things like that. But nobody, unfortunately, the hard work and the effort that they saw in raising cattle wasn't any interest to them.
Mm-hmm.
I had my youngest son and I had a feeder pig operation where we farrowed pigs out and sold to 4-H and FFA students for 12 years.
Yep.
And he was the only one that was somewhat interested in it, but he could see the light on education leading them to medicine and could to succeed that way. So I'm going to be the one that breaks the chain, I think.
Can't sneak a grandkid in there yet?
Not yet.
Not yet? Maybe?
Maybe. Well, my son that's in medicine, he might have some. He still talks about raising pigs with me. He enjoyed that. So.
Yeah.
And that was a hard deal because we didn't have heated barns. We didn't have automatic water, so we had to drain hoses, and it was 20 below. That's a hard way of raising pigs.
Yeah. So when did you when did the Russia thing start?
I went in early 2014 and came back in 16.
So you were there for 2 full years?
Almost 24 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you were straight through, didn't come back at all?
I was offered the opportunity to come back twice a year. The first time I was there for 8 months straight and came back for a week. And then I had the option of coming back every other Christmas.
Okay.
So I came back once for Christmas.
So they didn't have any sort of cattle industry?
They didn't have any beef cattle industry until 2009.
Really?
Except very, very small populations.
Mm-hmm.
This was the largest beef cattle complex in the world, basically. And it all started out by trying to establish beef to feed the domestic population.
Yep.
But while I was there, one reason that we were terminated, all 17 of us that were foreign specialists, agronomists and everything, our position was terminated because they decided they wanted only Russian citizens to work on the corporation.
Mm-hmm.
So we were all sent home in 2016, which is fine.
Yeah.
They had me try to train 3 veterinarians to take my spot.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get anybody interested in the hours. I basically worked 7 days a week. And I traveled 60 to 65,000 miles a year on going over an area about the size of western Montana that had 30-some farms scattered around.
Yep.
And so nobody wanted to travel. I was a single guy at the time, so it fit my schedule. I was provided everything except food, and then 97% of my salary I sent back home to pay the ranch off. So that was a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And I would still probably be there if it wasn't the fact they made the decision. They get a $1 billion subsidy from Putin and the Russian government to expand their operation each year. And obviously from Minnesota, you know what a 225 four-wheel drive horsepower tractor looks like.
Yeah.
They owned 758 when I left, and they were buying 30 at a time when I came back home. They had almost 1 million acres of ground.
Yep.
And they were farming, they were putting up 149,000 acres of corn silage in 22 days the last fall I was there.
Wow.
That's a lot of corn silage chewed up in 22 days.
Yeah.
And that's dry land, but it still was 6 feet tall because they're in an area where they get about 40 inches of moisture a year, and it comes at the optimal time. There's a little bit in the fall, but that helps the subsoil moisture, and most of it comes between February and July.
So were they?
It makes the feedlot messy.
Yeah. Did they get a grasp of what they needed to do from you guys?
I shared everything with them.
Yep.
The agronomists shared everything with them. They brought in specialists from Denmark on forage and pasture rotations, and they brought in people from Australia that were specialists in forage production and things like that. They used the latest strains of corn, and they utilized, even though it was dry land, they used fertilization and herbicides at specific times of the growing season to maximize during the time I was there, their corn production doubled in the 2 years.
Yeah.
As far as yields.
Wow.
And and most of the carbohydrate in the feedlot was corn, but they did raise some barley and they did raise some triticale. But most of it was corn, and they rolled it and fed it. That was unique because the average animal was in the feedlot for close to 200 days instead of 150, because their goal was to get a pen of about 320 to at least have 40% grade prime to meet the demand of the cuts for the steakhouses.
Yeah.
So they're in the feedlot, but they could raise a pound of beef for 42 cents a pound, where we have a hard time with getting anything out for less than $1. So economically, they had some great advantages because the ground was very inexpensive. The labor cost was inexpensive. Southwest Russia had great soil, and the growing conditions were ideal.
Why was labor so cheap?
Just the way it is. I mean, some of those ranch managers that were responsible for some of those ranches wouldn't even make $1,000 a month, American, USD.
Wow.
You know, they had a house provided with them and maybe a beef, but they would only make $1,000 a month, so that's pretty inexpensive.
Yeah.
Most of the cowboys would make $600 or less USD a month. Standard of living in that part of the world is pretty unique. It was an area where the German army held it for 3 years. So all the men my age and older were killed, basically. I was one of out of the 2,600 in the beef cattle division, I was the oldest one by 7 years.
Wow.
The 5 billionaires that own the corporation also raise 3 million pigs a year, and they raise 60 million birds for broilers.
Wow.
So it's quite a complex.
Yeah.
And the beef cattle division is the newest. And now they're thinking about bringing lambs in, but they have a huge problem with wolves in that part of the country.
Oh, okay.
Some of the ranches would lose 100 calves a year to wolves.
Huh.
Yet they are somewhat protected.
Really?
Yeah. They would have bounty hunters, but you only get 1 or 2 a month versus, some type of radical control. I'm probably getting carried away, so I don't.
This is great. So did you get to meet Putin?
I never met Putin.
No.
But I had a first-hand contact with the 5 billionaires, and one of the billionaire's sister was married to the Minister of Agriculture, who was right under Putin. Mm-hmm. So it was very heavily politically correlated as far as their subsidy. And then there was obviously some mafia money with the meat packing industry, just like here in America. So there was a lot of money that came in that way. And
you got to have some sort of crazy story that happened over there. I'm sure you saw some pretty...
Well, the craziest story is that during the conflict with Ukraine, we saw a lot of military vehicles, armored carriers and all that go up and down the highways and all that, and reconnaissance flights, because where I lived was less than 25 miles to the Ukraine border. Mm-hmm. And one of the ranches, the pasture fence was the border. The barbed wire was the border. And one day we were asked to go to a ranch that had a severe calf pink eye problem, because we didn't at that time have access to fly tags. That was a challenge of it. Was I had access to about 20% of the drugs and supplies that I had access to here in America, just because of licensing and all that. But one day I was asked to go to the ranch to look at some severe pink eye, and it was within a kilometer of the customs zone, which is the border and where they have the military guards. And so the ranch manager says, I didn't get the paperwork done, so you can't stop at the customs zone. You have to go back through the back way. So we went back through a bunch of round bale stacks and all that, and got through a little grove of trees, and all of a sudden a Russian Jeep comes out and blocks me. And there's a machine gun turret right on top of and that thing's pointed right at my windshield. Mm-hmm. And so the colonel gets out of the pasture side and walks over, and of course I know just enough Russian to understand it. Here I'm driving a Russian pickup with a Russian logo, and I hand him an American passport. Instantly he thinks CIA.
Okay. So
I was held right there with the machine gun pointing at me for 45 minutes while they made the appropriate phone calls to find out that I was not CIA, that I was just a beef cattle specialist, and that I didn't have the right papers, and my interpreter didn't have her passport with her. So she got into as much trouble as I did, and after 45 minutes, they told us basically turn around and get the hell out of there, so I never got to treat the cattle at all.
Really? So
that was if you've been held hostage with machine pointed at you, I didn't even dare fart.
Yeah.
And then after that, I waved at him and I stopped and visited with them and things like that. So people in that part of the world are just marvelous people. They're the same as people that settled in North Dakota and Minnesota and eastern Montana, Russian descent, ancestry and things like that. Marvelous people with strong work ethics. I really admire the women. With no older men in the area, the women did all the big gardens. There was 2-3 acre gardens. I gave them rides at 6:30 in the morning to the potato fields, and I'd give them rides at night coming back. They just knew me as American. They'd give me a Russian Orthodox little card and blessed me or something like that, which was a great experience. The Russian Jeep machine gun thing was probably the most dramatic of all the things.
Did you ever have conflict did they always just do what you said? Did they follow that?
No,
Are
that
they-
was frustrating.
Yeah.
I knew what was best for the cattle.
Yep.
I knew what was best as far as humane interests. I knew, because of my background, what was economically sound to do. And a lot of the recommendations remained on the desk of my director, who was a ex-KBG agent for months before anything was implemented. And then they'd have to twist it and work it over so it was more of a Russian version than a dumb American veterinarian version. But I did get to see a lot of improvement in welfare. I got to see a lot of improvement in production. Their overall problems is overgrazing. Their big problem is they misuse antibiotics and insecticides, to where a lot of the products that we still use here, there's a lot of resistance. So part of my efforts was to get licensing on new, particularly antimicrobials, to come in to treat pneumonia. We had ranches that had severe resistance to Draxin.
Really?
I would see orders of 3,000 250 ml bottles of Draxin ordered at a time.
Sheepers.
3,000.
Yeah.
I was involved in ordering 250,000 doses of Shield 5, which is a respiratory for the calves. I got involved in some huge orders.
Yeah.
3 or 4,000 jugs of 5-liter Dectomax at a time. But they misused it. My job was to educate and train them and get them so they would basically follow manufacturer recommendations. And there was a huge breakdown between me, the manager, and the people doing the work. And a little bit works, then a whole lot's a whole lot better. Or maybe they didn't understand that 1,500-pound cow got a 1,000-pound squirt, or something like that, or misused antimicrobials severely. We implemented parasite management and pasture rotation and things like that. Did some good things while I was there. The thing I'm most proud about is the welfare issue.
Yeah.
As a result, I was nominated for the National AVMA Welfare Award last year. And they gave it to some lady that developed vaccine for parakeets. Good joke, huh?
Yeah, there you go.
So I just don't know the right people.
Yeah.
But that was rewarding, because down deep I know that I did do some things of good value.
Okay.
Whether those programs are still implemented, they should be, because they have to follow the guidelines of the Certified Beef Program.
Yeah.
But there's a tremendous frustration involved because of the 57 veterinarians that were there when I started. There was less than 6 there when I left 2 years later.
Really?
They have a 68% turnover on employment a year, including feedlot, pack and plant, and farm labor.
Wow.
Just terrible handling of employees.
Yeah, that's got to be really difficult then to keep
so
protocol
it's
going.
very frustrating to go to a ranch and train somebody to do ultrasound, and then to come back 30 days later and find out that there was a brand new graduate that didn't know which spot to put the probe in.
Yeah.
So that was real frustrating, but I coped with it as best I could. I had a wonderful interpreter that could translate as I was talking, didn't have to wait till the end of the sentence.
Yeah.
Marvelous. And he stayed with me on Thursday nights, and we had American movie night, and I fixed spaghetti.
Yep.
So we had a good friendship on that. There was some marvelous agronomists that were there that were trained at Purdue University and places like that I got to get to know. And I have actually had one of them stay at my home here just a couple months ago.
Yep.
And so developed a good friendship with a lot of the cowboys, but they've come back to America and gone every which direction.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I see them on Facebook.
Yeah.
That's about it. I'm probably taking a lot of your time, so I don't want to
No,
do
you're
that.
fine. No, don't worry about it.
I've got a meeting. May I suggest this, John? I've got a meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning until 12. But then I don't have a whole lot. You're going to be in the area tomorrow?
We're going to take off to Bozeman.
You're going to take off to Bozeman. Okay, I apologize on that.
We only got a little bit left. We're okay. We're fine.
Okay.
What do you think of the beef industry currently here in the United States? What are the positives? What are the negatives? Where is it going?
It's very challenging. We're probably entering a phase of the beef cattle industry that's about as challenging as we've ever had, both in terms of economics and also with the consumer demanding so many requirements, and then of course the alternative protein sources that are coming out. This is, in my opinion, is more challenging than a lot of ranchers realize. As an industry, we've failed, I think, a lot in educating the people. I feel like it's kind of like the butter problem they had back 40 years ago when margarine took over.
Yep.
And butter didn't come out, and now we're seeing the cycle come back to where, there's nothing more enjoyable than eating a good beef steak.
Yep.
And most of the consumers recognize that. But the younger generation that's never been on a ranch or farm and never got digestive forage on the bottom of their shoes has no understanding of what beef and beef cattle are.
Yep.
Nutritionally, there's a lot of things in beef, vitamins and zinc and things like that that's very nutritious, along with having a good taste appeal. But the economics, such the last 20 years, you're seeing where the consumption per capita has dropped and is still dropping, and then pork and chicken, because the economics of growing and production has been so competitive. So we have some huge challenges.
Yep.
And the way I look at it, they're probably larger than a lot of people realize.
What
This ultimate hamburger thing by Burger King, I stopped going to Burger King, and I loved their burgers. I stopped going there because I don't patronize anybody that's done that to the industry.
What I guess so going down that line, what do you wish consumers knew, or what advice do you have for consumers out there that are not sure what to do or questioning things?
I think there's a misconception that beef is not nutritious. There's a misconception that all red meat is undesirable for health. I find that to be completely false.
Yep.
I'd like to see a stronger approach in education directed that way. Our beef checkoff dollars, I think, have been very advantageous, particularly as far as export. As you know, there's about a $200 premium on a carcass now due to export potential, and there's opportunities in the world now, even with the trade tariff thing and the arguments, where we could expand some of that. A lot of the world has become economically sound where they can afford beef in part of their diet. But I think we still have some huge challenges. My vision is I don't see the beef cattle industry here in America being the same in 10 years as it is right now. And maybe it will change a lot faster than 10 years. It depends on how this ultimate hamburger thing takes off. I hope it doesn't. but there's still a huge part of the population, the millennial population, has a mind frame and a lack of knowledge that has a tendency to go that direction.
Yep.
I'm very fortunate and glad that I've lived the majority of my life when I've seen, like in the last 25 years, we harvest the same amount of beef protein from 4 steers that we used to in 5 steers 20-some years ago, with the opportunity of improved genetics and better health programs and
Yep.
everything like that. But we still have some challenges because we still have the same instance of bovine respiratory disease that we had 20-some years ago. Even we've all, unfortunately, selected for certain cattle genetic traits that inadvertently we've selected for less disease resistance and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got, we see it with the forest. We see how forest production has changed in the last 50 years in America, and we're growing trees at a faster rate, and we got homozygosis of forest and not enough hybrid heterozygosis, and so we have forests that are now more disease prone and less disease resistance. That's why the spruce budworm is so, they all run in cycles, you know, but you can, and I know I'm getting really carried away on
you're
that.
fine. Don't worry about it.
But I think in my career we've seen selection of beef cattle genetics have gone one way and not emphasized enough on the health issues.
Mm-hmm.
And the facts are there that we still have the same instance of disease, particularly pulmonary type diseases now that we did 25 years ago, even with improved genetics.
So what do you think is going to change in the next 10 years?
What is going to change?
What do you think? You said you think the beef industry will be different in the next 10 years. So what do you think?
There's going to be a huge, more economical strain.
Yep.
There's going to be, in my own personal viewpoint,
Yep.
I think the number one issue that I saw in my practice career is we do not have any new generation people coming into the industry that's going to carry it forward.
Yep.
That's the number one problem. We have huge acreage out there that can only be utilized by livestock, particularly beef cattle. And to have people that are not involved in the industry, I see that that's going to be a huge challenge to carry on.
So then going to my next question, which is where I wanted to go actually, what advice do you have for young people that want to get in the beef industry? What do you have for advice for young people that have started?
The ones that want to get in the beef industry, there are opportunities in certain states where they can be subsidized in early starts and things like that, as you know, in South Dakota and some other states. That needs to be improved.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the big challenge is we have a 20 or 25 year gap of people that even have an interest to even do that.
Yep.
I mean, how many people in your graduation class have any desire to do agriculture?
If you look at my high school, not many.
Yeah.
Not many.
When late in my career, my average client was 63 years of age when I sold my practice.
Wow.
And there was only maybe 20 out of close to 300 ranches that had sons or grandsons that wanted to come up and continue the operation.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare.
Yeah.
I think that's the number one problem we have right now, even stronger than the economic stress that we have.
Is there a solution to entice young people to come into the beef industry that don't have any real ties to it, you think?
Good question. It would be nice to have some type of mentoring program, such as we have in veterinary medicine where students in high school and undergraduate have an opportunity to ride and work with veterinarians and things like that, which is a requirement on their application process. I know of none of that related to the beef cattle industry.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I have a high school student that comes in that's been in 4-H, because I have a responsibility of the 4-H program in this county, that has an interest in continuing on with the family operation, or maybe they're even a city kid raised in the city outside the farm that has a little bit of interest, but it's overwhelming when you start talking to them about the investment they have to do other than just their personal work ethic to get into a situation where even with leasing land, leasing cattle, it is grunt tough to get it to all tie together.
It's too bad.
Yeah.
So I guess I think that's a good conversation
Well,
here.
tell you what.
I got one more question for you.
Yeah, sure. I was going to say I could meet with you real early if you have a couple other questions.
I think this is good. This is good. I just want to, so you were talking about your hobbies that you want to bring back. What are your hobbies?
Well,
I read something about you throw a hammer or something.
I
So
do.
What is that? Like in track and field,
yes, sir.
the hammer?
I went through the windshield of my truck 30-some years ago and ended up underneath my truck for 45 minutes one night, and I did my mental bucket list as I was digging myself through the dirt and gravel to get out from underneath the truck. And in the process, I told myself that I was going to try to slow down and develop some type of personal hobby. And I was a good athlete in high school, but undersized, and nobody was interested in recruiting a 165-pound shot putter. Yeah. Even though I threw 50-some feet, which was really good. Yeah. So and that was all just farm strength and genetics. And so I started to get back into it, and it's led me to 5 continents and 38 national championships and 14 world championships. Wow. And I was in Chicago in August at nationals, and I've gone all the way around the world. I've thrown in France 3 years ago with both the bronze and gold Olympic medalists from the 1980 Moscow Olympics that were in my competition. There's times I've had moments in the sun where I've won 3 World Masters medals in my age group, and I've been able to win nationals 22 times in my best events. But I got hurt by a cow in 2004 and shattered my clavicle and tore my right shoulder up, and that's affected my ability. I wore 3 centimeters of bone off my right femur turning on concrete a couple thousand times for 20-some years, and so I have a prosthetic hip with a 3-inch extension in my right femur. Wow. And now I walk with 2 legs the same length instead of crooked, like a flat tire on the side of a tractor. But it's given me a wonderful experience of traveling to places in the world I'd never traveled for. Yeah. And it's been a wonderful hobby. And I throw, right now I still throw twice a week.
Oh, do you? Cool.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah, I have a fondness to, if I get a little frustration build up, I go out there and make divots in the ground. You know that Western theme song that says, "I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm good." That's my theme song.
That's your theme song, huh? I feel like a lot of people your age kind of hang on to that one.
But I've been fortunate and blessed because I compete with guys that, like at nationals, the guy that beat me at nationals was 6'7" and 320-some pounds, and I'm only 5'9" and 224, and I only got beat by 1 meter and 54 centimeters, which is pretty dang good to compete with somebody that size.
Yeah. Any other hobbies you were looking forward to get back into?
I love to do masonry work. I do mortar, and I lay brick, and I lay stonework for fireplaces, and I'm doing a veneer on the side of my shop right now that has a cement side. I'm doing it with the color of brick of the house.
Okay.
So I do that. I'm not an artist. I don't paint. I don't do anything. I do a lot of volunteer work. I've officiated 2 Olympic trials and 9 U.S. championships. And I've officiated some international competition.
Uh-huh.
I work with the CASA program, which is the volunteer program for children that are from homes where there's drug addicts, and I work with foster parents and things like that. That's been a nice joy. I guide fly fishing trips, and I sponsor 1 fly fishing trip every year where I donate for people to come to this area. I have a drift boat, and I guide them for a weekend, and they usually do a silent auction or bid a fly fishing trip at a national veterinary group, and so I've had that pleasure of guiding. I used to be avid fly fisherman.
Uh-huh.
I don't get out as much as I used to.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of variation. I'm kind of a unique guy that have a lot of variation with my likes.
Yeah.
Only critical side I see, or I've spent a lot of time working, so now it's time to back off.
I was gonna say, putting in 90 hours a week, how do you get anything? You've done a lot.
Even
in your
at
life.
even at my age.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I published a book last year.
Yeah.
I write articles. This is my 13th trip next week to go to Sioux City, Iowa, and that's not the easiest place to fly into.
Yeah.
I get to the end of Sioux Falls and have to drive.
Okay.
But that's been a great experience of speaking at some of these conferences, because it's fine-tuned my knowledge. I've had to keep updated and learn new information, which gives me a better perspective. It's been a very rewarding journey, and my only regret that I have is I only have 1 life to give to beef cattle.
Well, you've had an amazing life so far, and I think
I have. I've been real fortunate.
Yeah, and you still got a long ways to go.
Yep, I'm
Like
brucellosis positive for 35 years. So I have a head mount of a bison that came out of Yellowstone Park, and I call Oscar. His name's Oscar, and he and I are in the den at the same time, and we're both brucellosis positive, so I smile at that.
There you go. Well, this was a great chat. I'm glad that you...
Let me give you my card,
Yeah.
and I will be happy to try to communicate with you, email or something like that, if you have other... There.
Yeah.
Have other questions, I'll get you a card here.
Okay.
I think I've got one in my wallet. If not, I can walk in here.
Well, that's not big, but
But,
I just want to say thanks again.
you're most welcome.
It was great. I really appreciate it.
Well, I hope I didn't bore you.
Oh, no, I could have...
There's my card.
Okay.
Just call me Beef.
Call you
See
Beef.
I think this has the email on it.
Okay.
It's Hammer Beef.
Okay.
Oh, you get it off the website, but
Okay.
my email's hammerbeef.sager. So that's pretty good email.
That is good.
Yeah, you can
So.
take that card, and I would welcome you to look up the website. There's some
Okay.
really good pictures on the website.
Okay.
Really cool pictures.
Well, Bob, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to meet you, John, and I wish you happy trails in your travels. This part of the world is pretty picturesque, and
It is.
pretty special to live and work with people in the beef industry in this area.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, go Gophers.
And there you have it, folks. That was Dr. Bob Sager of the White Sulpher Springs, Montana area. So I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. If you get the chance, go to Apple Podcasts and rate it, and subscribe and tell some friends about it, and like and share on Facebook and Instagram as much as you can, and help spread the word and keep this thing going. So thanks, guys. Have a good one.